Greetings. I'm glad to welcome you all to this joint international conference on unilateralism and international law titled Unilateralism and Settlement of International Disputes. Tillotoma Foundation is glad to organize this conference in association with the Tehran International Studies and Research Institute. Tillotoma Foundation is a global organization working in the areas of international relations, financial, environmental, scientific, strategic, and defense policy. We are glad to organize this very important conference on unilateralism and settlement of international disputes. And the very pertinent sub-themes of this international conference are consequences of unilateralism in the emergence of international disputes and its peaceful settlement, dealing with implications of unilateralism in international jurisdictions, implications in international law, and challenges to conflict resolution. At the outset, we must note that disputes are common in international politics. There are territorial disputes, trade disputes, maritime disputes, sovereignty disputes, and several other kinds of disputes. Every state usually strives for what is best to their national interest. The national interest can be military, economic, and different other types. The manifestation of national interest can be in different forms. And it is due to the furtherance of the national interest that usually conflict arises. But there is usually a choice between conflict or cooperation. The major difference between unilateral action and multilateral action is dialogue with other stakeholders or other states. So in this regard, unilateral action is basically action taken without consulting others. So it is an action that is taken without taking others into confidence, without taking their viewpoints into consideration. And this leads to an ambience of suspicion. Unilateral action, particularly in a conflict situation, leads to undesired escalation. Unilateral action is often detrimental to peaceful settlement procedures of disputes. So, if you have a particular state taking unilateral action when there is some peaceful settlement procedures, conflict resolution procedures at play, it is seriously jeopardized by unilateral action. Another, key example of unilateralism is the disregard for international tribunals and courts. The disregard for international laws and treaties is not healthy for the international order. It can lead to chaos and violent conflicts, and it undermines the international order, the rule of law. It challenges the way decisions are made. It also seriously creates a situation whereby might becomes right when international laws are not respected.
Good evening. It is a great pleasure to once again be with the Tillotoma Foundation to discuss a very important issue, which is actually directly confronting the world today in a very global context, President Trump's unilateralist policies during his past 4 years. Hopefully, there will be some change with President Biden, as has been indicated by his newly administered team. And we hope that the United States will be back to the multilateral course as far as possible. Now, as you know, that we have had two world wars, and both the world wars saw the tremendous amounts of destruction, and that led to establishment of global institutions. First, it was League of Nations, which could not serve its purpose to contain another conflict, and therefore we had the United Nations in 1945, and which has just completed its 75th anniversary. It has not served its purpose fully, but it has been able to keep major global conflicts under control. But at the same time, we know that the sum is as good as the constituents of it. And therefore, the objectives that have been assigned or have been enshrined in the Constitution of the United Nations have to be respected by all the countries who are the members and who undertake, or for that matter, any international organizations that you become a member, you have to adhere to their principles you have voluntarily undertaken to be part of. But multilateralism's threat has come not only from United States, but it has come from major powers. At one time, it was easier because there were two big powers who were balancing the world in the post-Second World War era. And therefore, it was easier that the Soviet Union and the United States were trying to keep some kind of a balance, even though it was a precarious balance. But it requires the states to follow international norms and pay more respect to international institutions. In fact, you have to give up a little bit of your sovereignty in order for the global peace and security to stay. This is contrasted with unilateralism, where a single state can influence how international relations can be conducted. Today, in fact, we are in a situation where we have a problem between USA and China more so, and of course USA and Russia, and also with Iran. I mean, those are basically, if you come to think of it, these problems, they may have some other root causes, but at the same time, the way the hyperpower United States has behaved in the past 4 years is actually clearly evident that this was a unilateral act, whether it is by way of sanctions, by way of withdrawal from various key agreements and institutions, or for that matter, undermining the United Nations itself. In fact, I personally believe that the P5 or the permanent five in the United Nations Security Council have also been a root cause of a lot of problems in the world. And therefore, we have seen nothing really has happened in that sense, and we have seen the unilateralism increasing in different parts of the world. Now, but at the same time, how do we, if a unilateral act happens, and I'll come to various examples that are recently there in the last few years, which we can look at. But at the same time, the United Nations created International Court of Justice. It is the world community created World Trade Organization. There are other institutions, including the International Criminal Court, and they have their own mandate. But at the same time, United States has refused to be part of the ICC, International Criminal Court. And likewise, the WTO has been decimated because the judges are not being appointed. So the commercial or economic problems happen, and where we have the international domain is being really decimated gradually. And same thing, International Court of Justice. It's a body which gives judgments when the two states go to it, but it's not enforceable. Likewise, the United Nations Security Council is not able to pass resolution, because if passes resolutions are not followed. And we have seen what has happened in the case of Israel-Palestine, and whether it is in Libya or elsewhere, we see that there are more observed in violation than actually in following up. So might is right is becoming really the way the world is functioning, and that is unfortunately a major problem. Now, the unilateralism, as theoretically, if you were to think, is a state assumes that it has the right to act alone for pursuing national interest. with no necessity to take into account interests of other nations and states, even in case of allied states. Like we have seen that USA withdrew out of climate change treaty, or for that matter, it has withdrawn from the TPP that was agreed to, but without taking into account the allies. Similarly, withdrawal from the JCPOA, which was signed for nuclear containment of Iran by Iran and the 5+1. That is something that is withdrawal from that, and that's where the European countries have been very unhappy about it, because the great difficulty they had arrived at these agreements, and then one major country which is supposed to be there takes it out, and on top of it starts continuing unilateral action. For example, putting excessive sanctions, creating conditions which are very uh, for containing the spread of the nuclear weapons. If you have become a member of it, you must follow it. And if you are a member of the JCPOA, you must follow it. Hopefully, the next US administration will think it differently. And as President-elect Biden has said that he'll return to the JCPOA, we might see a little bit more of the peace and more forward movement in this situation. But of course, the situation, the geopolitical situation in other parts is changing rather rapidly. Actually, one of the Japanese diplomats, and I believe that he had said that the United States has pursued a policy of unilateral globalism, they call it like that. Very interesting phrase. Providing public goods in the form of security, opposition to communism, an open global economy, aid for economic development, and stronger international institutions. Now it takes all these, and if you add something called democracy project to it, then it completes the matrix. Now it is pursuing a policy of global unilateralism, promoting its own particular interests with little reference to those of others. So the United States is unlikely to become an isolationist country and will go wherever it is needed, and we see it in different parts of the world playing a very different kind of role. And countries change and the powers change their own objectives. For example, the US policy in 19th century was to seek liberty. And in 20th century was more focused on promotion of democracy, making the global society safe for democracy. But in the 21st century, it is very different what it was in the Cold War era now that we are seeing. Today, the challenges are very different. But it has been pursued by every country, whether it is a regime change in certain places. You will see that it is like, if you were to see, in my view, the biggest problem that has happened in the 20th century was the invasion of Iraq. And that has created the biggest problem that happened. That was the creation of terrorists and terrorism, which never used to be there. And that is what led to invasion of Afghanistan, from where the United States is trying to retract now after 18 years long war. Now, George W. Bush went in there. His doctrine was preventive war, confronting the nexus of weapons of mass destruction and catastrophic terrorism, regime change for rogue states, and democracy promotion. These are given by them. So they are the ones who have articulated these, and they are the ones who followed it. Now, it is not that only the USA has done it, but USA has done it mostly, I would say. For example, they basically, if you look at the Iraq wars of 1991 and 2000, I mean, they were basically created wars for different reasons, and baseless allegations of WMD, which has eventually come to be proven that is not there. But that destabilized the region. So far, we are not seeing anything. Similarly, Iran-Iraq war, if you were to see, they were supporting. But here there were direct invasions, even though under the UN resolutions, but the UN resolutions have been manipulated in a certain way where they've been able to flex their muscles to hardening positions. Now, another thing that you can come to think of it, the Libyan intervention. They, under the garb of right to protect, and they had a UN resolution, but at the same time, there was no policy thereafter. So it created a mayhem which continues in this last whole decade. We are seeing the situation in Libya, which has civil war going on. The two sides are there, and all the international powers are playing their roles arbitrarily and creating a mischief in that place. And nobody is following actually the UNSC resolutions. Likewise, you see in Syria, the fighters were brought from outside to remove Assad. Similarly, Russia comes and intervenes against the others under the garb of fighting the ISIS and the terrorists. That is continuing. I've already spoken about Afghanistan in the wake of 9/11. Until then, the United States and the rest of the world did not take seriously that India was suffering from terrorism for a very long time from Pakistan and cross-border terrorism. Most of the terrorists were located there. It is their foreign policy. This is the policy which is also comes under the garb of unilateralism, because you're using non-state actors to destabilize the country and inflict the wounds on them. So here we have seen what happened in Afghanistan. 18 years after billions of dollars spent and there's so many lives lost, they are now trying to return. Now, not being a member of the ICC has an interesting twist to it, because International Crimes Commission would look into the war crimes, of which one country, whether it is US, whether it is Russia, whether any big country which is intervening into another country literally, can come out and can be charged. And therefore, the US has decided not to be part of it. So if the biggest country is not part of an international institution, you would imagine how it is going to work. Now, similarly, the US's withdrawal, that is another big problem that we are facing. Now, the withdrawal from WHO, withdrawal from UNICEF, withdrawal from Paris Accord, withdrawal from JCPOA, UNRWA, which is for the Palestinians, and making WTO virtually paralyzed. We have a new DG elected, but she's not being agreed to at the moment, and hopefully Nigerian candidate will become the DG of the WTO and the judges will be appointed, so that this very important body which requires reforms, every body requires reform. UNSC requires the maximum reforms to become legitimate by everybody. Likewise, Russia's annexation of Crimea. I mean, it is again the might power, but even maybe geopolitical reasons and their own, they have their compulsions, but at the same time, the way it was done has its own. China, which is the second largest economy and trying to replace the United States as number one, its expansionism in South China Sea, Sino-Indian border. I mean, a country which has 16 borders but has 23 border disputes with countries. This is one country which very recently was awarded, the Philippines was awarded a judgment in its favor against China. But China refused to abide by it. It continued. So what do you do in that situation when a more powerful country, a P5 country, does it? Likewise, you see Saudi Arabia going into Yemen, or Nagorno-Karabakh, which is just very recent incident. Iran is being accused of fomenting trouble in different parts of the world through its partner organizations like the Houthis, like the Hamas, or for that matter, Hezbollah. And so this continues. Israel-Palestine conflict, where we are seeing a regular injection of unilateral approaches, especially by Israeli forces occasionally under the garb of combating terrorism. And that has become a very major problem. Now, even in that case, what President Trump did was he declared Jerusalem virtually as the de facto capital of Israel and agreed to pass on the Golan Heights to Syria. I mean, that is a violation of the international treaties, agreements, UNSC resolutions. And this is the problem with the situation that we are facing now. So far, unfortunately, terrorism has become the biggest problem for the world. But we do not have a single definition of the terrorism. Taliban, which has indulged in terrorism, so the USA and other countries have started changing the definition. There is a good terrorist and a bad terrorist. I mean, that is something that is going to have its own repercussions in future. So we do not know how it is going to play out eventually. But the way out is nothing but the rule-based world order. We need reformed institutions, whether in the United Nations Security Council, which still retains the format of the 1945 post-World War scenario where victor and the vanquished were represented. And so therefore it has to change. Countries like India, like Germany, the Brazil, and Japan have to be there. Those are the big countries, the big economies. They have to be part of it. And the countries, when they agree for a multilateral institutions, must have greater faith and adherence to those principles, without which it will not be possible for us to ensure peace in the world, which is extremely important, and to fight the major calamities that come across. For example, COVID-19. It is a very major challenge for the global scenario right now. And the UNSC can be more effective if it has proper legitimacy. It is at the moment, I believe, unfortunately, that it's a game of blatant power and must be dealt with in the context of real politics. That is what is happening. And that's how we can understand. But if it is possible within the ambit of international rules and regulations, we need to develop enforcement mechanisms, irrespective of any, there should be no exceptions to the rule. And that is what extremely important. Therefore, I believe that multilateralism and some kind of a balance of power might help to some extent. Thank you once again for inviting me.
I would like to thank Tehran International Studies and Research Institute for giving me this opportunity, and I hope that we could gather together once again without social distancing. I've been asked to give a lecture on consequences and challenges of unilateralism in international crisis. To begin with, I think we can all agree that COVID-19 showed us that we are living in a global village and we are connected with each other even when we are living miles away. Therefore, it is extremely important to stay united. In this regard, from the international law point of view, first, I will discuss how we can define international crises that could be considered as a threat to international peace and security. Then, I will name the 6 categories of crises and explain a disease like COVID-19 fall under this category. Furthermore, I would talk about solidarity and its elements and how the unilateral measures issued by some of the actors might damage the effort of international community to tackle the current crisis. At the end, I will discuss how the international community can decrease the negative impacts of such unilateral actions. Pursuant to the report of the chair of the high-level panel on threat, challenges, and change, which was convened by the Secretary General of the United Nations in 2004, any event or process that leads to large-scale death or lessening life chances and undermine states as the basic unit of the international system is a threat to international security. So defined, there are 6 categories of threat, or let's say crisis, with which the world as a whole must be concerned. Economic and social threats, including poverty, infectious disease, and environmental disaster, interstate conflict, internal conflict including civil war, genocide, and other large-scale atrocities, nuclear and other kind of weapons, terrorism, and transnational organized crime. These crises could also lead to the international disputes, which should be settled through cooperation. Concerning contagious disease, as a matter of fact, in 2014, the United Nations Security Council described the Ebola outbreak as a threat to international security and peace. In this regard, we can say that spread of a disease like COVID-19 could be recognized as a threat for international peace and security. And in line with Article 1 of the UN Charter, peace is secured through developing friendly relations among states. But here, I would like to mention that peace would be secured if different actors, including states, corporates, NGOs, individuals, etc., cooperate and work together. And of course, the content of cooperation in international law is against the unilateralism. As I said, COVID-19 has demonstrated that all of us are living in a global village where our acts affect each other, and we need solidarity to tackle this problem. On April 2020, the General Assembly adopted its resolution on global solidarity to fight COVID-19, which recognized the need for multilateral cooperation, unity, and solidarity. This solidarity could be considered with three elements. One, helping each other to achieve a common objective. Two, equality of the partners. And three, mutuality of obligations. Although various organizations and authorities are insisting on cooperation, we face unilateral measures such as sanctions against many actors, or let's say community during this pandemic. Unilateral sanction has been taken as a non-violent method to solve international disputes, but we now have evidence to the contrary. Unilateral sanctions breaches various rights and have several effects. The report of the Special Reporter on the negative impact of unilateral coercive measures on the enjoyment of human rights had defined human rights affected by unilateral sanctions in the course of pandemic. It has been generally recognized and confirmed that the right to health is the one most affected in the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. Some medical equipment and medicine are reported not to be available for purchase because of the absence of financial resources, the refusal of manufacturers to engage in transactions with targeted states and companies, the reluctance of banks to permit banks transfers, or the enormous extension of transfer terms, as well as the unwillingness of other companies to be involved in transactions because of the fear of secondary sanctions, even when companies in targeted countries are not included on sanctions list. Moreover, the impact of unilateral sanctions on the access to information in the course of COVID-19 is another problematic issue. In general, the COVID-19 pandemic revealed the short-term and long-term impacts of unilateral sanctions on the enjoyment of all categories of civil, economic, social, and cultural rights, including right to life, right to health, the right to food, the right to access to information, the right to a fair trial, the right to work, and the right to an adequate standard of living, and the right to development. On the other hand, humanitarian exemptions, which are imposed by states, do not work. Many countries have refused to lift sanctions, and despite the exemptions, many companies and banks around the world refuse to deal with sanctions countries, fearing the secondary impact of these measures. Since many rights have been violated during crisis, how the international system could protect these rights or decrease the impacts of unilateral acts? It is worth mentioning that COVID-19 is not a matter of one state, but that of the international community as a whole. Therefore, we come across a chain in which all the rings should be considered. In this respect, we need to say that the measure taken by one state or other actor could be, or let's say should be, in compliance with the rights and responsibilities of other states or actors. Thus, unilateral sanctions should be assessed for their legality under international law. The impact on human rights should be part of such assessments. If an actor violates its obligation under international law, it would have responsibility. In this context, failure by a state to ensure that the taken measures are in accordance with the international obligations may entail legal consequences for that state itself. This obligation is not only a duty for states, but also a duty for other actors. As it was mentioned before, COVID-19 has global impacts on health, safety, and other rights. As a result, multilateralism and international cooperation are needed to ensure countries and their community can adequately address the enormous challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. At the end, I would like to emphasize that COVID-19 underlines the importance of the principles of UN charters, which means the need for unilateral cooperation between people, nations, and countries, and the danger of policies based on unilateralism and confrontations. Thank you.
Yes, the topic we are discussing right now is really very interesting, and just few international events of this kind really raise such kind of conceptual or theoretical question, like what is unilateralism, how we should deal with unilateralism, what kind of manifestations of unilateralism we can observe in different regions of the world. And let me also, actually it's so difficult to discuss this issue after ambassador's remarks about unilateralism. He covered so many examples, so many cases from the world arena, and probably I will just limit myself to some conceptual remarks. We'll talk about conceptual dimensions or aspects of this issue, and maybe also touch some concrete cases from our region, Central Asia, and maybe from broader perspective, post-Soviet area. Well, first of all, I should say that when we talk about unilateralism, we should clarify for ourselves what it means, and when states, act unilaterally, when and why states act unilaterally. When the state's actions look like, unilateral, when these actions create challenge to another state. So otherwise, it doesn't matter how any certain country behaves on the international arena. Only when, I think, the state, with its behavior, with its policy, specific policy, which we call unilateral, creates some challenges to neighboring countries or to international community or to some region, we can, notice some elements of unilateralism maybe. And from this perspective, we should clarify when and why the state take such action, unilateral action. But at the same time, I would like to say, and also this is a kind of a hypothetical view, that unilateralism as such can be positive and negative. Sometimes when countries take unilateral action, I think the implications of such unilateral actions can be quite positive and create some positive changes or contribute to some cooperative or peaceful environment, or how to say, can become the initiator of some innovative approaches. That's why this country is unilateral, because it is an initiator of some positive changes or some novel approaches to international relations. But in most cases, I think typically when we say unilateralism, we mean mostly more negative behavior on the part of certain countries. So anyway, I think we can point out to both positive and negative implications of unilateralism. It depends on the context, as you know. It depends on the geographical area. It depends on the interests and goals which this country pursues in its international behavior, in its international politics. Well, this is just briefly about conceptual aspects of unilateralism. Let me also just briefly discuss with you some cases, specific cases, maybe from my area, and enumerate some examples of unilateralism. And my analysis of unilateralism tells me, interesting, let's say, interesting assumptions, because the more I elaborate on the concept of unilateralism, the more I find that there are different reasons, different implications of unilateralism. Take, for instance, one example, the relations between Uzbekistan, my country, and the neighboring Tajikistan, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. And take the issue of the construction of a high mountainous hydropower station, which is called Rogun hydropower station. It's a big topic. It deserves longer discussion. Why Tajikistan side decided to construct this huge installation, hydropower station. But just in a couple of words, maybe I should say that the Tajikistan's decision to construct this hydropower station, Rogun, was unilateral. We can understand actually Tajiks who would like to have their own independent source of electric energy and to export this energy, because this station will be capable to produce a lot of, a huge amount of electricity and satisfy not only domestic needs, but also will be will be exported. But from the ecological point of view, from the viewpoint of water management of rivers, it can also have some negative consequences for the neighboring country, for Uzbekistan. And since first days of independence, since 1991, there was explicit or implicit conflict between Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. So Tajikistan insisted that it would construct this hydropower station by all means, but Uzbekistan resisted, because Uzbekistan is a much stronger country, much more powerful country in the region, in Central Asia. It took some other unilateral actions as measures against Tajikistan's overall attempt to create Rogun station. Both countries resorted, as you see, to unilateral instruments. When Uzbekistan criticized Tajik side for its unilateral decision to create this station without any consultations with the Uzbek side. So Tajikistan responded that it's in their interests, in Tajik side also, let all involved sides know that there would be no environmental consequences, no damage to water flow of Amudarya River and things like that. That it's normal, it's okay, and no problem with this Rogun station. But Uzbekistan, in response, said that no, it is really challenging, and took all measures against Tajikistan, up to exerting some pressure, diplomatic pressure, and also blocked some railroads from Tajikistan through Central Asia, and imposed some sanctions, trade barriers. And because Tajikistan is a much weaker country, of course, it suffered from these unilateral responses from Uzbekistan. Why I say that both resorted to unilateral instruments? Because maybe in other cases, in other regions of the world, such kind of actions maybe wouldn't be evaluated as unilateral action. But in Central Asia, both Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, together with other three countries of the region, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan, so 5 countries of the region, from the very beginning of independence after the collapse of the Soviet Union, declared the regional integration project. So they have been engaged in overall integration project and proceeded along the way of integration. So if integration means something, if integration is a value for these 5 countries, so all countries, I think, should consult with each other if they want to decide on some huge projects like Rogun hydropower station. That's why I say that being a part of integration project, Tajikistan didn't consult with Uzbekistan and decided on its own to create this station. And Uzbekistan, also being a part of a regional structure, also took unilateral measures against Tajikistan. So this is one interesting case. I call this phenomenon selfish unilateralism, because both countries only manipulated with their own interpretation of national interests, self-interest. That's why I portray this sort of unilateralism as selfish unilateralism. Another interesting case, because I have several minutes, another interesting case briefly, which to my mind deserves mentioning, is Kazakhstan, another Central Asian country, and Kyrgyzstan, also Central Asian country, decided again unilaterally to join the Eurasian Economic Union, EAEU, whereas Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan, other Central Asian countries, didn't. They refrained from joining the EAEU. So that's why, again and again, because Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan are the part of Central Asian structure, regional structure, their decision to join another structure, regional structure, Eurasian Economic Union, is nothing but a unilateral decision. Because when Kazakhstan enters the EAEU or Kyrgyzstan enters the EAEU, this membership in another structure in some aspects contradicts the regional structure, Central Asian Union. So in economic terms, in geopolitical terms, in terms of trade, customs, and many other aspects. That's why I also evaluate this decision on the part of Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan individually as unilateral action, with action which also challenges the regional unity in Central Asia in favor of another structure, Eurasian structure. That's why I call this unilateralism compelled unilateralism, which means that they were so compelled they didn't have another option under visible or invisible pressure from Russian side. They had to join the Russia-led regional structure, Eurasian Economic Union. So I think I have 5 or 7 minutes. Well, take another example. For example, Russia. Russia is, as I said earlier, the leader, the dominant power in the Eurasian Economic Union, right? And in the EAEU, there are 6 members. And of course, Russia is a hegemon, the great power in this structure, dominating power. And in many cases, because Russia is interested to maintain its sphere of influence in the post-Soviet sphere, tries also to involve more countries to cooperation with the EAEU, cooperation either in the form of membership or observer status, or some in some other way. So that's why for EAEU, for Russia, is not so much a simply economic, model, economic project to integrate economically post-Soviet countries, but geopolitical, invention. And that's why Russia very often resorts to unilateral actions such as negotiations with other countries of the world, like Vietnam or some other remote countries, about free trade zone between EAEU and those countries. So Russia gets such negotiations unilaterally without consultations with members of the EAEU, but on behalf of the EAEU, although Russia was never authorized to discuss the future cooperation or membership of other countries in the EAEU. That's why this is another example of unilateralism. I call it geopolitical unilateralism, because Russia is interested from geopolitical point of view to keep post-Soviet space in its orbit, in its sphere of influence, in the engagement as a hegemonic power, of course, not just the equal power, but hegemonic power. That's why its unilateralism is nothing but a geopolitical unilateralism. By the way, there is another example which illustrates well Russia's unilateralism, such as annexation of Crimea. You know this case, right? In 2014, in the wake of conflict in Ukraine, Russia organized I would say, artificial referendum in Crimea, and Crimean population voted for secession from Ukraine and wanted to join Russia. And this was the pretext for Russia to proclaim that Crimea from then on is the part of Russia. So it is, if we use the more, stricter, stronger academic language, should be considered annexation of Crimea. And it was, of course, unilateral action. It's not by accident that after annexation of Crimea, sanctions were imposed against Russia from different countries, mostly from Europe and the United States. Well, I can also continue with examples of unilateralism. Actually, I have no more time. There are interesting, quite, exotic, to some extent, unilateralism, domestic unilateralism. When we talk about unilateralism, we mostly mean international arena, right? International relations between different countries, great powers, and things like that. But I can also provide interesting example for discussion, of course. I can be wrong, I can be right, but unilateralism from domestic politics, especially this is so characteristic to non-democratic countries, when the government or the parliament unilaterally adopts some decisions without consultations with the population, with civil society or expert community. One of the sharpest example from the recent past from my country, from Uzbekistan, was unilateral decision of the Oli Majlis, which is Parliament of Uzbekistan, on joining the Eurasian Economic Union. President demanded that the Parliament should consult with expert community, with civil society, and collect all arguments and prepare the convincing report about the expediency or non-expediency of joining the EEU. Unfortunately, the Parliament quickly decided unilaterally on its own, without serious engagements with independent experts and other part of civil society, and just issued the decision that Uzbekistan can join the EEU in the status of observer. So this is an example, maybe debatable example of unilateralism, but unilateralism from domestic politics. And finally, what I wanted to say in my conclusion, of course, the question which deserves debates, discussions. Actually, we can observe from the international system that, of course, as I said, there are different unilateralisms in plural. Yeah, selfish unilateralism, compelled geopolitical unilateralism, and many other forms of unilateralism. On the other hand, smaller countries also can take this kind of behavior, like what I discussed earlier, Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan or Tajikistan, and great powers also. So when smaller countries took, let's say, destructive unilateral actions, some other powers, powerful countries, can pressure on them and force them to return to normal behavior in the framework of international law and agreements and so on. But when great powers take unilateral decisions, who can force them and return them to normal behavior if that unilateralism on the part of great powers are destructive? As I said earlier, actually unilateralism can be positive and negative, but let's just talk only about negative implications of unilateralism. When great powers take destructive unilateralism path, who will force them to adhere to multilateralism? And when smaller countries, weaker countries take destructive unilateral actions, of course there are number of mechanisms, including great power influence, to return these smaller countries to normal behavior within international law framework. So as you see, there are controversial situations today in the international system, and I think all these issues, all these controversies needs to be clarified and discussed. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, good morning to all viewers. My name is Mahmoud Jawadi. I am Europe analyst and freelance researcher based in Tehran. I am so overwhelmed to take part in this important event with a very timely topic. I'm thankful to Tehran International Studies and Research Institute, TISRI, for inviting me, and also I'm happy to join distinguished panelists and scholars from Tillotoma Foundation in India. Well, I'm very briefly going to touch on some ideas and arguments that I think is very important to address in order to find out the correlations or any relation between the unilateralism and the emergence of disputes and how to settle those disputes and challenges. First of all, allow me just to mention three main presumptions for global conflicts and disputes in the contemporary era: that globalization is prevailing, there is no borders, and right now we are living in a borderless world that social media are ruling, and many new features that change our lifestyle and also our statesmanship. Well, the first presumptions regarding global conflicts and disputes is that these conflicts and disputes do not respect borders. As I said, that we are living more or less in a borderless world and community, so any conflict or any disputes in, for example, in the Middle East will definitely impact another group of community in Far East, in Southeast of Asia, or in Latin America, in Europe, and it is right now, thanks to the technology and also the globalizations, it is very easy to use social media, for example, to radicalize a person at the heart of Europe. So we cannot just consider the threat and danger in a physical term, but we should also consider how homegrown terrorism or homegrown radicalism may emerge thanks to the threat or the disputes and conflicts in other parts of the world. So the first presumption is that these conflicts, these disputes, do not respect borders, and they are universal and global in nature and will impact all more or less. The second presumption is that conflicts are hybrid and complex. Different state actors and different non-state actors are involving, as well as right now the conflicts and disputes are not just armed conflicts or military conflicts. They could be trade conflicts, humanitarian conflicts, social conflicts. Well, it's different in different regions. So these multi-layered conflicts also should be considered as another presumptions right now. And the third presumption is that conflicts are unpredictable. No countries, no governments can predict the directions of the global conflicts, and also, for example, of course, that unpredictability is because of the ramification of the conflicts. No countries can claim that the borders of my country is safe and secure, and these problems and these conflicts and disputes are for another region and is not for mine. As I explained it in the first presumption, there is no respect for borders, and it is universal. So another feature of conflicts is that such conflicts, global conflicts, could be self-generated or self-regenerated when reaching to the borders of another country. So it doesn't mean that when there is an armed conflict in the Middle East or somewhere else, such type of conflict will be ramified equally and with no change to Europe. No, that self-regeneration means that the conflict, the armed conflicts could turn into radicalism or extremism in another way in Europe, not just armed conflict. So these are three presumptions, and in response to these three presumptions that I think that all countries agree upon them, there is a dichotomy of working together to answer these challenges, find settlement for this dispute, or act lonely, act individually and find the best answers, not only individually but in line of national interest and not a shared interest or global interest. Well, Of course, what we think and what many think is that working together in order to answer for a global challenge would be and could be the best possible answer. However, some countries and some states believe in unilateralism, maybe not strong unilateralism, but sort of unilateralism. But what is I would like to touch here, just in very briefly, I would like to mention and enumerate some perceptions that those countries are going towards unilateralism. And why? What perceptions they are thinking or they have in their minds that convince them unilateralism is the best answer and not multilateralism. Well, the first perception is about immunity. Countries, in some countries, for example, the United States believe that, or some European countries also believe that when there is a challenge and there is a conflict in East Asia, that conflict is for East Asia and not comes to our shores and our borders. So that perception of immunity, either because of the geographical distances or because of the security or anything, is somehow a wrong perceptions that countries believe that they will not be impacted by a conflict. So they are not immune, and that immunity, I think, is a bad perceptions that many countries may be deceived by that immunity. The second perceptions could be about the powerness, which means some countries believe they are capable enough, they are powerful enough to safeguard their interests individually, to safeguard their security and safety of their people and populations with no help from other countries or other organizations. So they act lonely and believe somehow in nationalism or unilateralism, thanks to, again, the perceptions of that powerness or thinking that they are powerful enough to handle all issues individually. And the third perceptions is somehow a relative failure of international organizations or norms, rules, and regulations that convince some countries that they are no longer capable enough or well founded enough to address the global challenges. That's why they think that national approaches are much better and will lead to safeguard the security and safety of their countries and as well as their national interests or national security. These are three perceptions that those countries believe in unilateralism, think, and I think that the turning point of the challenge is these three perceptions. So they need to be revised, they need to be amended, they need to be reformed, and such perceptions are the main challenge for having unilateralism as an answer by some countries. Well, some final thoughts just to share with you and some observation is that as long as the cost of unilateralism, or what they call it nationalism or anything, or isolationism, as long as the cost of these concepts and these approaches are not very much high for those countries, they will continue believing and acting on that basis. So somehow it could be a good start for those who believe in multilateralism to think how they can increase the cost of unilateralism for those nations and states that think unilateralism is a good direction and they need to adhere to that direction. The second thought and observation is that for sure, unilateralism as well as multilateralism has a spectrum, but what is important and to consider the impact, the extent of impact, is that which country is taking that approach. If in a small state, for example, in South Africa or in East Asia, take that unilateral approach, definitely it impacts its people, that country, or its surrounding, but it's not globally or universal impact. So, which country is taking either middle power states or rising states, real definite, or also conventional powers, is very important to find out to what extent that unilateral approach may impact others. And for example, we are seeing in the past 4 years, the Trump administrations has been taking unilateral approaches in some areas. You see how negatively impactful those behaviors and approaches on other countries, particularly in my country, Iran. It's quite a feeling to us. I think that's tangible to other countries that they are seeing, and also that feeling is reflected in many reports and many documents in different organizations, United Nations, Human Rights Council, etc. Well, the third observation and thought is that roughly all states in the global community sees multilateralism as an instrument or leverage and not as a goal or end. So that could practical or operational approach to multilateralism could be a challenge for this concept, as long as roughly no state believe in it by heart or think that this is the end. All countries think that they can secure their interests if they adhere to or if they seek multilateralism, but whenever they think that in another areas a unilateral approach or nationalistic approach is much better and would secure their interests, they may change courses. So that viewpoints or perspective vis-a-vis multilateralism and unilateralism is also another problem, and that's why multilateralism lacks that foundations to be the basis, and those multilateral organizations are always faced with challenges from some countries, and their credibility or their legitimacy may sometimes underline or underestimated by other countries. Well, these are 3 thoughts, and I think that just to sum up, there are 3 main presumptions for why global conflicts is important, and there are 2 answers, definitely, very generally, to take unilateral approach or to take multilateral approach to address and also to settle those disputes and conflicts. And for those countries and states take unilateral approach, there are 3 wrong arguments, and we can call it perceptions more neutrally, but they are roughly wrong arguments, and also some thoughts that countries and states roughly use multilateralism as an instrument and not take it very seriously. Just for those areas that think it could secure their interests, they will work and invest on multilateralism. And also, just very briefly mention, for example, in Europe and among European states, there are some ideas and arguments that from the unilateral approach of the United States regarding World Trade Organizations or North Atlantic Treaty Organizations, NATO. The reform may secure their interests or make those organizations more capable. So there are some sort of ideas that from unilateralism, we can take unilateralism as an instrument, as a leverage to reform or improve the functions and performance of multilateral organization. So this is, I think, we should acknowledge that this is sort of game countries and states are playing, and we cannot take it very seriously. And whenever they think that it's very good for them to follow multilateralism or follow unilateralisms, there are some instances and signs of such change. In their policy and their approach, particularly among European states, that they are in general believe in multilateralism, and they recently launched a League of Multilateralism, an alliance of multilateralism led by Germany and France. Well, thank you very much. I think that's time's up for me, and I'm looking forward to more fruitful and more thought-provoking debates in the near future, hopefully in person, maybe in Tehran or in New Delhi or elsewhere. But I'm looking forward to it, and I hope that what I'm sharing with you could help you to give you a better picture and understanding about the correlations between unilateralism and the settlement of international dispute. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tillotoma Foundation, for inviting me here. A very good evening to all the fellow panelists. Well, I will talk about unilateralism, international law, and multilateralism. I won't take much time. I will try to raise some basic issues regarding unilateralism, but I'm not sure whether I'll be able to answer all the basic issues, because these issues are very intriguing, very contentious. Now, the subject of, in the field of international law, the subject of unilateralism attracts considerable interest from governments, international bodies, as well as from scholars. The International Law Commission has been working on the topic, unilateral acts of states, since 1997. Unilateral acts become especially contentious where they are associated with the imposition by one state of its values and wishes on another state without the consent of the latter. Now, unilateralism refers to an individualistic approach to foreign policy. There are unilateralism in domestic politics also, as Dr. Kapilov has elaborated with reference to Central Asia. But normally, when we talk about unilateral actions, we normally refer to international politics. So unilateralism refers to an individualistic approach to foreign policy. It not only poses a threat to the concept of state sovereignty, but also challenges the existing international system established after World War II. Well, it seems that a new wave of unilateralism has arrived of late in international politics, in international trade, in environment. Now, I can refer to the now famous shrimp turtle case at the appellate body of the WTO. it is a case in point, the famous, now famous shrimp turtle case. Now, at the appellate body of the WTO, India, Malaysia, Pakistan, and Thailand protested against US ban on imports of shrimps from these countries in the name of endangering the turtles. This all happened in 1996-97. Long debate, long battle at the WTO, whether this actually endangered the turtles as claimed by the US, or was it a unilateral action by the US to stop the import of shrimps from these countries. So that is one issue concerning environment. Now, there are examples galore from the field of international politics. Now, several scholars, they considered the bombing of Kosovo by the NATO as, again, a unilateral action, or imposition of sanctions on Iraq, or the American policies with regard to nuclear issues in Iran. All these were seen by many scholars as unilateral actions in international politics. Now, two series of questions arise with regard to such unilateral actions. Two series of questions, they come up. First is effect on international institutional system. That is, if unilateralism goes on, if unilateralism is stronger, what would be the effect of international institutional system like the UNO, like WTO? And the second one is effect on international relations in general in the wake of globalization. Now, globalization demands some sort of multilateral efforts. Now, if unilateralism prevails, do we talk about a reversal of globalization? A reversal of globalization, already there are talks about a reversal of globalization. Well, that is another debate. I'm not going into it right now. But even a few years ago, we were so enthusiastic. We were pronouncing about globalization. But unilateralism, my point is, unilateralism is a threat to globalization. Now, unilateralism is also a danger. As I said, it undermines the international system. I believe personally, like others in this panel, that international law must be followed strictly. But here, another question creeps in, another issue creeps in with regard to respect to international law. We all should respect international law. That is true. But there is a question about international law being respected versus, I would say, national interest. Now, does national interest come in the way of international law? Now, we have seen the US withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord in 2017. Negotiated the Paris Climate Accord, negotiated by nearly 200 nations of the world. But President Trump withdrew, saying that it hurt American jobs and US interest as well. So, President Trump clearly mentioned American interest being hurt if US continued with the Paris Climate Accord. So there may be several other examples. Whenever national interest is in doubt, whenever a country feels that its national interest is going to be surrendered, it does not hesitate to, break international law. So, international law versus national interest. And that has been, we have been observing this trend for the last many decades since World War II. That is, national interest always prevailed, although we know that to maintain the international system, we must adhere to international law. Now, we all know that multilateralism multilateralism can sustain international law, or multilateralism can promote international law. That is cooperation among member states. The very idea of the United Nations was the product of multilateralism. I mean, the UNO after Second World War was a product of multilateral efforts. UN, through multilateralism, as the ambassador was saying, it was able to solve some international problems through application of international law. The UN was able to solve some major international problems. And as we all know, Chapter 7 of the UN Charter deals with settlement of disputes. I can remember specifically two articles, Article 1 and Article 33 of the UN Charter, that deal with the settlement of disputes. But despite such praiseworthy efforts, the UN system is not above question. The ambassador was talking about the composition of the UN Security Council after the Second World War. The composition of the UN Security Council very much reflected the prevalent power, domination at that point of time in 1945. The major powers, they all became permanent members of the UN Security Council. And no third world country, not even a single third world country, was given a permanent seat at the UNO. Mind you, China joined later, not in 1945 when the UN started its journey. So the point is that some multilateral institutions, some multilateral efforts, they also do not always conform to multilateralism, I would say, because as I gave one example, that the UN, which was a product of multilateralism, even the composition of the UN Security Council, which is much debated today, the composition of the UN Security Council remained as it was in 1945. So therefore, multilateralism, although we think that it promotes international law, it maintains cooperation among international actors, states, but multilateralism can also ignore international law, and that is why unilateralism gets a fillip, in my opinion. Dr. Tipolov talked about unilateralism in Central Asian countries, by Russia, sometimes by Uzbekistan. So my point is, whenever the national interest of a particular country is hurt, whenever the national interest of a particular country is in danger, that country does not hesitate to bypass international law. So the question is, multilateralism must be promoted. At all costs, multilateralism must be promoted. But how to stop the advancement of unilateralism, we have seen that whoever attained power, whoever became powerful in international politics, it resorted to some sort of unilateral actions, whether it was USA, whether it was Soviet Union, whether it is China. So the point is, international law, we know, is respected through multilateral efforts, that I have been emphasizing upon. But sometimes whenever one or two particular nations, whenever they become powerful, there is a tendency to bypass international law. Now the solution is, of course, we have to go for more cooperation, more peaceful settlement of disputes. But the point is, we need reforms also. Like the reform of UN Security Council, it is much talked about nowadays. I believe reform of international law and some international, the ambassador talked about the international courts. So they should be activated, they should be galvanized. And international law, it is high time that we take a new look, a fresh look at reforming international laws, and we take a fresh look at reforming several multilateral bodies like the UN. The UN has completed 75 years of its existence, but the debate over the most powerful body, which was at the time of establishing the UN, which was conceived as the most powerful body, the UNSC, the UN Security Council. The debate is still going on whether the Security Council should have only 5 states as permanent members wielding veto powers, or whether it should have a broad-based cooperative framework by including other nations from Asia, from Africa, from Latin American countries. So my point is that yes, we must go for multilateralism, we must go for more and more cooperation in international politics, but at the same time, we must think of reforming the multilateral bodies existing now, the important multilateral bodies like the UNO, like WTO and others. And of course, we must take a fresh look at international law. And as the ambassador also said, that there should be more and more cooperation among other powers, other than the dominant powers, to come close and to put pressure on a unilateral actor and to make their points hard in international forums. So multilateralism must be sustained to curb unilateral actions. But national interest, whenever a nation will try to see its national interest prevail over everything, unilateral actions will continue, and unilateral decisions will follow. I do not really, as I said at the beginning, I do not really find a ready-made solution to curb unilateralism. Whoever will be powerful in international politics, country XYZ, whoever is powerful in international politics, it will resort to some sort of unilateralism. But cooperation and multilateral efforts by other states to put pressure on the unilateral actor must also continue. With this, I end my presentation. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for hearing.